Hi, I'm Billy Beck, Extension Forestry Specialist with Iowa State University and Assistant Professor in the Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management at Iowa State. We're really excited to have you out here today. This is a very unique practice within the state of Iowa. It is a saturated riparian forest buffer. This was funded by the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture. The title was From Nuisance to Asset, Establishing Saturated Riparian Forest Buffers on the Landscape. And what we mean by from nuisance to asset is a lot of times trees have a negative stigma associated with them within the agricultural enterprise. In saturated buffers and riparian zones especially, they have a negative stigma of intruding and blocking up tile drainage and backing up water into fields. So the purpose of this was kind of to address that and look at, can we establish trees with this edge of field practice? Can trees be an asset to the overall agricultural enterprise and provide a ton of other compound benefits in addition to water quality, like hunting, recreation, diversification of income through non-timber forest products and timber harvest, and just general beauty and aesthetics on the landscape. So we're really glad you could join us here today. This has an addition to the research component, which we're looking at basically, can this riparian forest buffer remove nitrate and dissolve reactive phosphorus from tile drainage water? And also, we're trying to quantify root intrusion into tiles over time and seeing if our species selection of trees and water level management can help dissuade that root intrusion into tiles. Secondly, which is exciting for me, we have a teaching and extension component to this site here just south of campus in Ames. For extension, we're right by the road. We've got two different types of tree plantings here. We have what we call a seedling planting, where we plant bare root seedlings, but we also have what we call a direct seeding portion of this, where we actually plant thousands of tree nuts or acorns on the landscape to establish trees that way. And there's pros and cons to each practice, which we'll discuss here in a second. So this is a great place to bring producers to introduce this practice of saturated riparian forest buffer, but also talk about tree planting and forestry in general and how that can be a benefit to the overall ag enterprise. For teaching, it's very rare in the Ames area to get what we call a stand that is a single cohort of trees, which means trees that were all planted at the same time and are at the same age. And what this allows students to experience is to watch the stand develop over time, what we call stand dynamics, and see how the canopy develops, how each individual tree can assume canopy dominance, and really watch and learn the big concepts of stand dynamics. So I'm very excited about this site. It's got an extension, research, and teaching component, so I'm very, very glad we could share this with you today. One of the most important things you need to consider when doing a tree planting is species selection. And a lot of folks really don't think about that, and it leads to a lot of failures in tree plantings. And what I mean by that is they try to pick a tree that they like, that they want on their landscape, and they don't really consider site conditions or other management conditions in that decision. So we didn't just select these trees by random that we use in this buffer. We selected 3 tree species. This one right here is an American sycamore, and again, this is only 2 years of field growth. I'm about 5'8", 5'9" with my shoes on. And this is, it's taller than me in 2 years, which is a really cool, fast-growing bottomland tree. We also selected swamp white oak, and our third treatment was a mixture of northern pecan and shellbark hickory. We didn't just select these by random. Considering the site, considering the practice, in central Iowa here, we have a very high pH of our soil. Not very high, but it's about 8 when we tested the soil here. So that kind of limits the number, the range of bottomland species that we can establish on this site. So we wanted to pick species that would match the site, that could grow well in a high pH situation, and we also wanted to consider trees that could do well. This is a saturated buffer, right? So we're inundating, we're saturating up to about a foot below the surface. So we wanted trees that would do well in that saturated conditions. Going back to the root intrusion, a lot of times people have issues with willows, box elder, cottonwoods, what I'll call aggressively rooting species and very high flood tolerant species. So we wanted to address that in-tile rooting, we wanted to select species that not only met the site conditions, not only met the, compound benefits to an agricultural landowner conditions, but also species that could tolerate that saturated condition, but also not be so aggressively rooting within the tile zone. So sycamore, swamp white oak, and shellbark hickory pecan are kind of in that not so extreme flood tolerance zone that we believe they can sustain their root system in those inundated conditions, but not be so aggressive in inundating or intruding into the tile that has moisture in it that the roots are going to be seeking out once that water level drops. So we really put a lot of thought into selecting these 3 species that are out here.